The game within the game runs real deep for this one. On paper, there's not much intrigue for a 3-6 Florida squad headed to Oxford to face playoff contender Ole Miss. But you just take one quick look and that's where everything gets very interesting. It's no secret that Lane Kiffin is who Gator fans want to be their next head coach. For what's become another lost season for Florida, there is reason to be intrigued, especially when you look at these two teams met last year. The Gators won, being unranked up against a ranked Ole Miss squad. But this year, Ole Miss off to their 10-game start at 9-1 since 1962. All those things at the forefront, and in the background you see the drop note. Lane Kiffin reported to be the top candidate for the Gators' open head coaching position. That can lead to a lot of distraction. But what's Lane Kiffin think about all that? Take a listen.
I haven't even talked about it to him, and I hadn't had one of them. And I think I'm pretty close to the players where they walk by or they say something, like if it was on their mind, they'd make a joke or something. I don't think it is. I think that they're very focused on what to do. Again, I said it's a different age nowadays, like when I addressed it a couple weeks ago, and I certainly don't think it was a distraction since. We won Oklahoma, South Carolina, played really well last week. I just said, hey, this is kind of the world that you're in. You guys are used to this where players didn't used to, these guys get way more of it than I do. They get calls on Saturday night after games from other coaches talking about next year and how much money they have for them and their plans for them and their system. So I don't think it's that big a deal.
Zach Goodall and Chase Parham both joining us now, both with 24/7 Sports and covering Ole Miss and Florida. And Chase, let's start with this. Lane Kiffin says he doesn't think it's too big of a deal, and we'll get into the game, of course, but I have to ask you, Chase, being there in Oxford, being around the reporters, being the people that Lane Kiffin is alluding to, what is the smoke that you feel? Is it real, and how is it truly being handled there when it comes to Lane Kiffin and potentially jumping to be a head coach wherever that might be next year?
It's definitely real, and I think you could tell that yesterday with that press conference from Lane Kiffin because, look, Lane Kiffin, the Twitter persona, and Lane Kiffin in person with his words, two completely different people. Lane Kiffin tells the truth in almost every press conference, and I believed him as he was talking yesterday. You could tell that he truly does not believe that it is a distraction for his team, a team that's been very locked in this season, a team that's overachieved by already hitting the over from a win-loss total in Vegas, and a team that is having a lot of momentum to make the college football playoff for the first time under Lane Kiffin and in general for Ole Miss. Now, internet world, it's all kinds of distractions. It's all over the fan base, but Saturday's going to be a huge crowd. And here's the truth, and this is not great for headlines. I don't think anybody knows what Lane Kiffin is going to do, including Ole Miss Athletics Director Keith Carter and including Lane Kiffin. I believe him when he says he hasn't made a decision yet regarding Ole Miss, Florida, or any other potential job that is open or will open. But what I find so fascinating here is it's one of the first times we've had the new school program that has really, conquered the portal, and Ole Miss is having the most success it's had. It's first time it's 9-1 since 1962. They're trying to win double-digit games 4 times over the last 5 years, and it's sort of a head-to-head matchup against a Florida team that's had more losing records over the last 10 years than Ole Miss, fewer successful seasons over the last 10 years than Ole Miss, but a lot of tradition, at least under the two coaches with Steve Spurrier and Urban Meyer. They've got Heismans, they've got stadium size. Lane mentioned those, but then he came back to saying what also matters is NIL, everyone moving in the right direction. Your AD, your chancellor, your foundation, that's never mattered more than it does right now. And Ole Miss has succeeded in giving him all these different, all the ropes pulling in one direction, maybe as much as any school in the SEC. So that's what I find fascinating about the decision is Lane Kiffin has moved his entire family to Oxford. How much does that matter? He gave a glowing comment that was almost Rockwellian yesterday about Knox, his son, being the high school quarterback locally and in town and throwing 3 touchdown passes in a regular season finale to the running back coach's son. In Florida, where does he see them when he talks about these huge blue bloods and they still have some inherent advantages? Is he mentioning Florida there? Because Florida's obviously had a ton of success under Spurrier and Urban Meyer, but in a lot of ways, Florida's a program that matches the coach's ability. There's been coaches that haven't succeeded. Dan Mullen was very good, so Florida was very good under Dan Mullen. They were elite under Meyer. They were elite under Spurrier. But unlike LSU, they don't necessarily prop mediocre coaches up. You look at LSU, Les Miles won a national championship. Ed Orgeron maybe put together the best roster in college football history. So the question for Lane is, does he see Ole Miss as sustainable long term? And then how does he actually see this Florida job in relation to what he has going on from a family situation?
Yeah, and comparatively, when it comes to the distractions, I think Florida, at least the players and coaches, the coaches more so knowing that they're not going to necessarily be here next year moving forward, are doing everything they can to make sure this isn't a distraction. They do want to finish the season on a high note. They talk about bowl eligibility. They have 3 games left, and their tape is their resume. Yesterday, Billy Gonzalez, the interim head coach, met with the media, and we were starting to, get into the Lane Kiffin topic. And at first, he was extremely complimentary. He came along with a list of stats and facts as to why Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss have been so successful. I think he caught himself because he was basically, reading down his resume as to why he'd be a great fit. And eventually he was like, you know what? I should probably stop answering these questions. But players at the same time, they even acknowledge that they've seen the rumors. They hear about it. They're trying not to pay attention to it. So from the distraction angle, again, they're trying to lock in on this weekend and their next several games rather than what's going on behind the scenes and with the administration. But from the administration side and the booster side and anyone that's either a decision maker, decision influencer, every source that I talk to is pointing to Lane Kiffin as the number one candidate. He's been the number one candidate. There's alignment there. It sounds as though Scott Strickland, who rumors going back several years, I mean, even since Billy Napier was hired, that he might have some pushback on the prospect of Lane Kiffin being a candidate at Florida. That doesn't appear to be the case anymore. It sounds like he is their number one. In fact, the people I talked to just trying to get a feel for this coaching search, there really doesn't seem to be any alignment or consensus as to who a backup option would be if Lane Kiffin ultimately doesn't take the job. It's going to be a long couple of weeks still. I don't think that we're going to have any definitive answers until Ole Miss is further down the stretch here with this likely college football playoff berth. And Florida has to play a waiting game as a result of it, even if they're not necessarily wanting to be patient with it. I'm sure they would love, in theory, to get Lane Kiffin's commitment here before the season ends, before signing day, obviously before the portal opens in January. I just don't know how likely that is if it ultimately is the decision that Lane Kiffin makes. I agree that I don't think he's made it, and I don't necessarily know how close he or anyone in his circle are to making it at this point.
Speaking from my Florida grad goggles right here, I also say that I do want Lane Kiffin to be the head coach at Florida. And I think that, Chase, that makes it so interesting for this game, because when you look at how the season could go for Ole Miss past this weekend, a lot hinges on Saturday, because if Florida were somehow able to get into Oxford, get the upset win, then that really throws the CFP hopes in flux. But as it stands right now, they have to feel good about those chances, right?
It's a really crazy game from that standpoint, because if Ole Miss loses this game, it looks like it's completely on Lane Kiffin, and it's coming off a season last year where you can make the argument Ole Miss had the number 2 roster in college football. They win 10 games by double digits, but they lose the 3 games that are all single-digit games. Last year they blow 2 games where they were double-digit favorites coming in. And everything is right there in front of Ole Miss right now. They're going to have maybe the largest crowd in school history on Saturday. It is going to be an animated, it's going to be a loud, really raucous environment with all the Florida stuff going on. I expect some extra energy from the crowd at Vaught-Hemingway Stadium. And Lane Kiffin has this right here on his racket. It's a home game against against Florida, and it's a road game against Mississippi State. 2 teams they should beat. And anything less than that, than 11-1, is going to look like it is a distracted team, whether that's true or not. And especially coming off last week where Kentucky bludgeons Florida. We kind of already forgotten that Florida did play Georgia to 1 possession the week before. So in a weird, warped way, all the pressure on Lane Kiffin right now, I do expect, we'll get to some predictions probably, I do expect Ole Miss to play well on Saturday, but it's an odd amount of pressure on Lane because of everything going on, because everything is right in front of him, and that environment is going to be completely conducive for a win or maybe even a blowout win. It's just up to Ole Miss and Lane to actually perform that way.
Zach, I think that word pressure is such an interesting word to throw out there by Chase, because you can use pressure and look at Florida, the pressure on DJ Lagway that he potentially, I guess, has felt, feeling like he was supposed to save the program, to save Billy Napier's job, hearing from Coach Gonzalez yesterday. Now what's the pressure on him just to play well and to have a good game? 11 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, got benched last week against Kentucky, but now is still going to get the first team reps. He just has to get something that we really haven't seen all year.
Yeah, I mentioned your tape being your resume, right? If I'm DJ Lagway or anyone in his circle, I'm trying to burn the tape from this past weekend, and I think that there's probably a couple of games you can point to. Because, yeah, it's totally thrown his future into flux, you would think. Is he the quarterback of the future, at least short term, being that he's going into his junior season next year at Florida? This season would suggest that any coach coming in would have a reason to be concerned about that. Now, Lane Kiffin has obviously done a fantastic job with quarterbacks in his past. There are other candidates. I'm sure they're going to be looking for quarterback development as part of their resume, because there's been a large investment put in DJ Lagway by this university and those surrounding them for him to be successful, for him to be the guy. You mentioned it right. He's going to get the first team reps in this week, at least to begin the week. The way I see it is because of that, he is going to be the starter again this coming Saturday. Is that going to be the case for the rest of the season? I'm not entirely sure. His backup, freshman Tramel Jones, has already appeared in 2 games. In theory, you play him in 3 more, he burns a red shirt. So there's a lot at play here when it comes to this decision. And again, a lot of it just comes down to DJ Lagway's future. If you're going to bench him for the rest of the year, and I'm not saying that it's necessarily going to be the case, but if you do, that's all but, raising the white flag. And at that point, you have to wonder if he ends up going elsewhere. He's got a lot to prove still. He's got to cut down on these turnovers. He talks about his decision-making being a problem this year. I've mentioned it before, I think he's still impacted by his offseason, whether it's that he is still dealing with injury, even if he's not technically hurt, just because there was so much that went into it. His shoulder and the apparent need for surgery that he didn't end up getting. You think about the missed practice time. He only practiced fully for the first time 12 days before the season. So there is a lot working against DJ Lagway that isn't necessarily in his control at this point. And I would think from his perspective, if he wants to stay at Florida, the next coach is at least going to be forgiving of that and still see why he was so coveted in the first place, why he was able to produce the way he did as a freshman. But it all starts with going out and putting it together a more competent performance against Ole Miss and then finishing the season on a better note than he's been on so far.
Chase, so many outside factors for this game. It still will kick off on Saturday, and there will be a winner. That'll be who?
I think Ole Miss is going to win this football game. I don't expect a repeat of Kentucky. Lane Kiffin yesterday mentioned that Florida sort of dealt with a blackout game where everything goes the other direction, and so that happens sometimes, once or twice a year. I expect Ole Miss to win comfortably. I expect them to win by a couple scores, but I do expect it to be fairly competitive. For Lane and Ole Miss, Lagway is one of the reasons why there is some concern. He's tough to bring down. When he does get on a heater, he can really run it up. He beats Ole Miss last year in Gainesville, so they've seen him do it. The defense does have some talent. It's not an incapable football team, as you see 2 weeks ago against Georgia. So Ole Miss is going to win, but I expect a fairly competitive game, and maybe Ole Miss pulls out by a couple scores there by middle to late second half.
And I see it the same way. I think Ole Miss is going to win here potentially comfortably. I might go with Florida covering 15.5, if only because going back to Billy Napier, and this is still, if you think about it, Billy Napier's team, while he's not here leading it anymore, they've had a tendency, not always, but often, I would say, to play up to their competition in these ranked games. I mean, you look no further again than the Georgia game, beating Texas earlier this year. You put this Kentucky game before either of those, and you think Florida's going to get blown out in both of those. So I think Florida will come out motivated. I don't think players have necessarily quit, although that performance on Saturday certainly looked otherwise. But there's no way I could pick against Ole Miss right now based on the way that the Rebels are playing and based on the way Florida has performed as of late. There's just nothing that really gives me confidence they could go in there and pull off an upset.
Saturday, 7 Eastern, Florida, Ole Miss. Lane Kiffin, if you're somehow watching this as a Florida fan, I say, come on home to Gainesville. We need you. We need you bad. Thank you, fellas. We appreciate it as we look forward towards this Saturday and everything else with every Saturday around the country, because over on the CBS Sports College Football YouTube page, you get segments and interesting info like this from our insiders from all across the country. Scan that QR code, like, and subscribe.